The answer is more alarming than almost anyone is prepared to admit. Bread, rice, vegetables, prices have doubled overnight. People are arguing in aisles. Checkout lines stretch out the door. You assume it is a supply chain hiccup, maybe a trucking strike or a bad harvest season. But the real cause is something far less visible, something most people never think about, something that quietly holds the entire global food system together. Fertilizer. Not geopolitics, not climate change, not fuel prices. Fertilizer. It sounds almost too ordinary to be dangerous. But here is the question that should keep every policymaker, farmer, and concerned citizen awake at night. What actually happens to the world's food supply when the system that feeds it starts to break down? To understand why fertilizer matters so deeply, you first need to grasp just how completely modern agriculture depends on it. Three nutrients sit at the center of everything: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Remove them from the equation, and crop yields would collapse by nearly 50% almost immediately. That is not a gradual decline. That is a sudden, catastrophic failure of the global food system. Today, the world feeds over 8 billion people. A staggering portion of that capacity exists solely because of synthetic fertilizers developed and industrialized over the last 100 years. Before these inputs became widely available, hunger was a constant companion for much of humanity. Now, they are so deeply embedded in how we grow food that most people have never once stopped to consider them. The fields that produce your bread, your rice, your vegetables, they are almost entirely dependent on fertilizers that arrive through a supply chain most of the world knows nothing about. Without the Haber-Bosch process, billions of people alive on Earth today simply would never have existed. At that time, the world faced a looming agricultural crisis. Soil nutrients were being depleted faster than nature could replenish them. Then came two German scientists who changed everything. Fritz Haber discovered a way to chemically combine nitrogen from the atmosphere with hydrogen to produce ammonia. Carl Bosch then scaled that laboratory process into industrial reality. Together, they created what became known as the Haber-Bosch process. Suddenly, humanity had access to a virtually unlimited source of nitrogen-based fertilizer. Crop yields soared. They are choke points waiting to be triggered. But here is where things get dangerously complicated. That system is not evenly distributed across the globe. A small number of countries hold extraordinary control over the raw materials that keep farms running worldwide. Russia and Belarus together supply a massive share of global potash, one of the three essential crop nutrients. China dominates phosphate exports, giving it enormous influence over global food production. And Morocco sits on the largest known phosphate rock reserves anywhere on the planet, holding roughly 70% of the world's total supply. This is not just an economic footnote. It is a structural flaw built into the foundation of global food security. This was not an abstract market fluctuation. It was a direct, measurable failure of the global food system, triggered by the fragility of a supply chain most people had never even considered. When Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, the international response brought sweeping sanctions against both Russia and Belarus. Almost overnight, two of the world's largest fertilizer exporters were effectively cut off from global markets. The consequences were immediate and severe. Fertilizer prices spiked by 200 to 300% within months. For farmers in wealthy nations, this was painful but manageable. For farmers in developing nations across Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, it was catastrophic. Fertilizer became unaffordable. Fields that should have been nourished were left under-fertilized. Crops that should have grown simply did not reach their potential. The economic shock of 2022 did not stop at farm gates. It traveled directly onto dinner plates, hitting the world's most vulnerable people with devastating force. The United Nations and the World Food Programme sounded urgent alarms, warning that the fertilizer disruption could trigger a food crisis worse than anything seen in decades. Across sub-Saharan Africa, parts of South Asia, and Central America, families already living on the edge faced shrinking harvests and soaring food prices simultaneously. For people spending 70 to 80% of their income on food, even a modest price increase meant impossible choices between eating and surviving. Wealthier nations, with stronger subsidies and diversified supply chains, absorbed the shock far more easily. Their grocery prices rose, but shelves stayed stocked. The disparity exposed a brutal truth. When global food systems fracture, the poorest populations do not just feel the pain first. They feel it almost entirely alone. That makes phosphorus arguably the most underappreciated existential resource on Earth, a mineral quietly holding up the entire global food system while almost no one talks about it. There is a slower, quieter threat building beneath the surface, quite literally. Phosphorus, one of the 3 essential fertilizer nutrients, cannot be pulled from the air like nitrogen. It must be mined from phosphate rock, a finite geological resource formed over millions of years. Current estimates suggest that high-quality phosphate reserves could become critically scarce within the next 50 to 100 years. And here is what makes this truly alarming. There is no synthetic alternative. No laboratory process, no technological shortcut, no substitute waiting in the wings. Nitrogen had Haber and Bosch. Phosphorus has no equivalent breakthrough on the horizon. When high-grade reserves run out, they are simply gone. A dangerous feedback loop, quietly tightening. There is another dimension that rarely gets discussed. What synthetic fertilizers are doing to the planet itself. When farmers apply more fertilizer than crops can absorb, the excess does not simply disappear. It washes off fields into rivers, lakes, and coastal waters. This runoff triggers explosive algae growth, which then depletes oxygen in the water, creating what scientists call dead zones, vast stretches of ocean where almost nothing can survive. The Gulf of Mexico hosts one of the largest dead zones on Earth, fed largely by agricultural runoff from the American heartland. Meanwhile, synthetic nitrogen fertilizers release nitrous oxide during soil breakdown. Nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. They are instruments of geopolitical influence that rarely make headlines but carry civilization-defining consequences. Nations controlling fertilizer supply chains now wield extraordinary power over food-importing countries, creating leverage that rivals oil in strategic importance. When Russia restricted fertilizer exports following sanctions in 2022, it was not merely a trade disruption, it was a geopolitical signal. Dependent nations suddenly realized their food security rested in foreign hands. This dynamic is fundamentally reshaping international relations. Countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America are urgently reassessing trade dependencies they once considered routine. Diplomatic relationships are being redrawn around agricultural inputs rather than traditional military or energy considerations. A new form of resource nationalism is quietly emerging. Nations are treating fertilizer reserves the way previous generations treated oil fields, as strategic national assets requiring protection and control. But together, they represent genuinely meaningful progress toward a more resilient food system. One of the most promising developments is precision agriculture, where satellites, soil sensors, and artificial intelligence work together to deliver fertilizer exactly where crops need it, at exactly the right moment. Instead of blanket applications across entire fields, farmers can now target specific zones, cutting fertilizer use by 30 to 50% without sacrificing yield. That is a dramatic reduction in both cost and environmental damage. Alongside this technological shift, there is growing excitement around biological fertilizers. Scientists are developing microbial products containing bacteria that naturally fix nitrogen directly from the atmosphere into the soil, mimicking what legume plants have done for millions of years. These living inputs can partially replace synthetic nitrogen, reducing dependency on energy-intensive chemical production. Neither of these approaches alone solves the crisis. Precision tools require expensive infrastructure, and biological alternatives still have limitations in scale and consistency. Recovering it means extending reserves that might otherwise last 50 years into something far more sustainable for future generations. Several nations are now investing heavily in domestic fertilizer production facilities, deliberately reducing their exposure to volatile international supply chains. This mirrors how energy independence became a national security priority decades ago. At the international level, conversations are emerging around treating fertilizer supply as a global public good, establishing cooperative frameworks that prevent single nations from weaponizing access during crises. Perhaps most promising is the circular economy approach. Scientists and engineers are developing technologies to recover phosphorus directly from wastewater treatment plants and food waste streams. Instead of mining finite reserves and losing nutrients to runoff, these systems capture and reuse what already exists within our waste infrastructure. This nutrient loop concept is genuinely transformative. Every city produces phosphorus-rich waste daily, and awareness, however small it seems, is always where solutions begin. But now you understand what is actually behind that image. It is not just drought or war or mismanagement. It is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It is a supply chain stretched across a handful of countries. It is finite rocks being mined faster than they can be replaced. It is a system that feeds 8 billion people while quietly fraying at the edges. The fertilizer problem is not a farming issue. It is a civilization-level vulnerability hiding in plain sight.